In today's video, I want to cover Heavenland. So Heavenland is a metaverse project that's basically minting today on Solana. So by the time you see this video, it'll probably be on secondary sales. And the reason I wanted to make this video is because this project looks pretty impressive and there's a lot of potential here, right? So obviously, as you can see, they've got a really cool looking website. Now, I don't know how much of this is just pre-rendered versus in-game footage or in-world footage, but they do have a pretty impressive website that kind of just really, grabs your attention. Now, what they're trying to do with this project is basically build a metaverse style project on Solana. So Solana is the blockchain, which means low transaction fees, which I love. And the whole idea is it's a tube in Earth's orbit, right? So it's basically, if you look at this is kind of like a tube, so that's why it goes up like that. So essentially this is based on research on what a sustainable city would look like in outer space. So it's like this whole gravitational tube so that you maintain gravity. And this kind of reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if you guys have ever read the Bobbyverse books. I think there was a world in there called Heaven, which was basically this whole kind of big tube thing that was massive. Now, they're doing their first NFT drop today, and it's for parcels of land. So they have this whole land system. There are 30,000 parcels, and they're doing a first parcel of 5,000 today, and then they're going to do another 5,000, another 5,000, another 5,000. So the way these parcels work, right, is they're essentially land that you can own and build upon in Heavenland. So as you can see, there's these different areas, right? And there's essentially this elevator, right, which is probably the most valuable area to be in. And with these parcels, what's really interesting is that not only are you, when you mint them, you'll randomly get one of these areas, right? With obviously certain areas being more valuable, but you'll also have different height and depth. So you'll have like this high-rise parcel where you can build high-rise structures. And there's also parcels where you can drill through and go underground or go onto the other side, basically to the outside of this tube, right? So there are some which have this ability to be built on the outside of the tube. So this parcel side is pretty interesting, and you obviously have high traffic versus lower traffic areas, height and depth, and then you also have distance from the elevator, right? So if you look here, A plus is basically this area that's really near the elevator. It's only a tiny portion of the total. Obviously, it's going to be far more valuable than, let's say, the other areas. So that's pretty interesting. Now, full disclosure, guys, I'm not on the pre-sale. I'm planning to try minting it publicly if I can. I hope I can. So what can you do with your parcel of land, right? So obviously you get this land, what can you do with it? So you can build on it, you can monetize it, you can do so many things with your parcel of land, right? So some of the examples they give you in here is you could build a casino, or you could build an apartment and people could rent it out, or you could have advertising on your building. So they have this whole thing of, kind of similar to these other metaverses. You're essentially able to build and monetize your parcel of land, but you have to build upon it. You don't get a pre-built building. So their goal with this project is to have over 1 million users using this at the same time, which is pretty ambitious, right? And they also want to do this while maintaining a high level of decentralization. So what's their game plan for this, right? So part of their game plan to be able to achieve this is they're going to use Solana as the consensus layer, right, as the blockchain layer. So this will be used for things like your virtual identity, so your avatar, your ownership of your assets, and the virtual economy, right? And big reason for that is the low transaction fees on Solana as compared to other blockchains. Now, the other piece of this is the content layer, right? So the content layer, so they're going to be using IPFS, which is InterPlanetary File System. So essentially, it's kind of decentralized file storage that's kind of distributed. I don't understand the technical side of it, but they essentially will have all of this content on that layer. And then they'll have the presentation layer. So they're using Unity engine. So Unity is used for a lot of multiplayer games. It's used for a lot of mobile games. It's a very legitimate game engine, right? And they plan to start out with obviously the web browser, but then they want to do mobile, desktop, and eventually their goal is VR. So like having a truly immersive experience with virtual reality with this world. Now, that is obviously pretty far away. Now let's talk about the team, right? So as you can see, it's pretty hard to find info on their team here, but I did talk to them in Discord. I talked to them in Parcel's Discord, and I asked them, hey, what's the team like? So they have 15 people working on the project right now. The team is currently undoxed because they are working on registering their company, and they're working on basically, they're raising funding, they're getting the whole registration legal side done. And I imagine at that point they can do it, right? For a lot of these teams, they stay anonymous early on because of the fact that they have other commitments, other projects they're working with. So it does make sense, but if they aren't doxed within the next month, that will start worrying me a little bit. Now, as of this point, I feel pretty good about minting this just because, I've read through the white paper and the economy paper, which is extremely in depth. So you can see that these guys have a plan. They clearly have a high level of professionalism with this. So I do think in the short term, 2.5 Sol isn't much. Even if it pumps to 5 Sol on the secondary, I'll gladly buy this. Now, one thing I did mention before is with the 30,000 supply, they'll have to make sure that the demand is higher than supply to make sure the NFT is actually appreciated in value, because they're doing first 5,000 today and then 5,000 probably later on. So that is a potential concern if they don't keep the marketing going, if you buy a bunch of land and then there's more land on there. But I don't think that will be an issue with the project, as well as then there'll be far more demand than the supply for that, right? So let's quickly talk about the token and the tokenomics, right? So the token that's in the game ecosystem, it's called the Hto token. It has a supply of 500 million. And so this token will be used in a wide variety of ways in the game ecosystem, right? So you can use this token for any assets or service in Heaven Land. So with the Hto token, you can obviously buy land, you can buy, buildings in it. Any kind of service in this ecosystem will be through Hto. So some examples of how their economy would work is, for example, if you own an apartment, you can rent it out and get regular income. So let's say you work at this casino and your customer service in this kind of metaverse world, you will be paid a salary in Hto from the casino owner, right? You can even set your building up to stream ads, get paid in Hto from advertisers. Or let's say you want to do a concert and you want to stream a video, you can get your audience to pay for it, right? So there's a lot of ways where they want to use Hto as kind of the lubricating token of this ecosystem. So one of the cool things as well is with the Hto marketplace, all the payments will be done in Hto. So that's one of the key features here is Hto will be used for a lot of the transaction fees. So that essentially means that there will be a revenue stream for the ecosystem, right? Transaction fees are huge. If you're getting 2.5 to 5%, that's a lot of money that's put back into basically either improving the game, obviously making sure the team is paid, and so on. Let's talk about tokenomics, right? So the tokenomics are like this, right? So there's 22% for the foundation pool, and the foundation pool is really this pool that's for content creators and developers to build in the ecosystem. So it's to incentivize development in here, right? So if you have these metaverses, you need people to build so people actually want to use them, because if you just roll it out, there's nothing to do, nobody wants to play or live in them or do anything in them. And then there's a 20% staking pool, so people who basically stake their Hto, and they have an interesting staking mechanism as well. There's a 26% treasury pool, includes VC rounds, paying for developers, employees, IDOs, and providing liquidity. Now this makes it a little bit hard to understand what their team pool is, because they have a 20% allocation for the team, but then also they're getting paid from the treasury pool, so it's just a bit vague. But there's just this huge 46% of their tokenomics where it's unclear where it's going, right? So the other piece is the community pool, which is 12%. So this is for giveaways, token airdrops, community and marketing initiatives, etc. So this is more focused on giving it to the community. And then the team pool, as I said, is 20%, which is quite high, right? I do think that the team is getting both the treasury and team pool, because they said they can use the treasury pool to pay devs and employees. So it's like, okay, are you getting 20%, but are you also getting part of the other 26%? Like, how much is it really, right? Now, the team does have a very, very high allocation. However, I did talk to the team. They said that their allocation was on an 18-month lockup. So that's actually pretty bullish. Usually if there's, a lot of these projects, they have very short-term lockups, right? They'll do their IDO and then 2 or 3 or 4, 6 months later, they start linearly vesting, right? And then basically there's sell pressure because the team, VCs, and so on have the incentive to sell. Now I'm curious as to the lockup periods for VC. So this is one of the big things with these projects is you want to understand the token lockup periods for the team and the VCs, right? So if the VCs also follow the 18-month rule, I'd be very bullish on this project and invest much more heavily, because nobody makes any money unless this project is doing well a year and a half later. However, with a lot of these projects, they're kind of like Ponzi-nomics, where the VCs and the team make a bunch of money when they dump it on retail, and then they, if the project doesn't go well, they can just start another project. They've already made millions of dollars, right? While them saying, hey, we're not taking any money for 18 months from our team pool, that does mean that they are much more dedicated. Now, obviously, people have to be paid in the meantime, but the big rewards shouldn't come so fast, especially for VCs and basically early team members, right? You have to make sure that everybody's in it for long. Now, if you look at their economy paper, right, they have an extremely in-depth economy paper where they talk about all the different parts of the metaverse. I'm not going to dive deep into it because of the fact that it would take forever to just explain how this whole thing works. But one of the core mechanics is renting. So you can rent assets through delegated staking, right? So there will be basically the rentee has to stake some HT on the renter's behalf, and the reward from stake will be split between renter and rentee, right? So there's essentially this whole renting mechanism, and that's also how the staking works. You have to actually stake land. So the good thing is that they're clearly thinking about how to incentivize people actually building and using their land and also renting out their land, because a big problem in a lot of these metaverses is people buy land and don't do anything with it, right? So by doing this, you're essentially ensuring that this whole staking economy with the rent economy means that people are using it for productive reasons, right? Because if you're a landowner and you are like, hey, I don't want to build something because I'm too busy, you can rent it out and get that done. So that's a great way to set it up. Now, in terms of my overall thoughts on the project, right? Like, you guys I'll have the links to the website and the white paper and so on. My overall thoughts on the project are that, honestly, building a virtual world isn't easy. It's a massive project to build out the metaverse, right? It's not something that's easy. So yes, there are some simple Web 2 worlds that have been built out, like Second Life or Habos. And there's examples of those, but even those are pretty complex projects, right? So when projects are really ambitious, I can't help but be slightly skeptical. I personally find that the level of ambition is extremely high. So I personally think it's better to start out with building something simple that people use and have fun with, rather than trying to build a whole world at once, which is what I kind of feel like the white paper is doing here. So to give you an example of this, I like Botbergs and how they're doing it, because what they're essentially doing is they're building these game planets and these little mini games, right? So they have these FPS mini games and racing mini games, and these are components of the whole virtual world, but they're starting with something fun that people will want to play first before getting into trying to build this whole metaverse, right? So I think I would love to see more projects like that, where they come in, they're not like, hey, we're building this massively ambitious project that there's literally going to be dozens of teams building these massively ambitious projects, but it's like, what can you do to build something that leads to that massively ambitious project, but with something that actually proves that, hey, people want to come in and actually use it. And what's concerning to me is there's so many of these virtual worlds coming out, half of them will be empty because there's so many of them entering the market, and a lot of them aren't fun yet, right? So a lot of them have very similar themes and roadmaps. And what could also happen is we could end up in a situation like these DeFi protocols, where they massively reward early adopters for liquidity and for jumping on and using their basically ecosystem, but then the early adopters just jump to the next ecosystem that rewards them with tokens, right? It's not really sustainable. So like I said, I like Botberg's approach. I like approaches where you build something fun that gets people in and invested and kind of opening up the software and actually being involved in the game world, and then expanding that out to a metaverse, right? So I actually think that rewards usage instead. That's not purely based on financial incentives, because people are gonna actually come in there for fun, and then eventually, yeah, obviously it's gonna turn into this big metaverse and people will be rewarded financially. Now, I could be completely wrong here. I'm going to be honest. I haven't really been a virtual world kind of guy. I've usually played games like Call of Duty or Fallout, and a lot of times, my multiplayer stuff would be just FPS, right? So I could be completely wrong here. Those are just my thoughts. That being said, at 2.5 SOL, this is a pretty low risk mint. They have 15 people working on this. There's a lot of these early stage projects, and listen, they don't all have to go to being the next metaverse for you to make a profit, right? They could literally just, as long as the team's developing and team's showing good progress and there's work being done on it. I think that, you know, the valuation of these projects will increase, and you can exit if you start feeling at any certain point that, okay, I've taken my profits and I feel like this project isn't going anywhere. So I do think that this project, if they dox themselves, there will be a lot of price action and these will be worth a lot more. A lot of the, you know, money coming in is based on potential, right? So even if you look at games like Sandbox, I think they had the private alpha recently, and that's, you know, it's worth a ridiculous billions of dollars, right? So none of these valuations are based on anything realistic. So I would be, you know, I do think there's good potential here because somebody has to build a metaverse, and a lot of projects will, and people will bet on them, and there will be money to be made. But I would just want to temper that with the cautious side, which says that, hey, there's a lot of these metaverse projects with a lot of impressive teams. What do they have in terms of actually getting people to use these metaverses that other projects don't? These guys, they have these token incentives and this foundation program. I think that's a good start, but I personally think that I'm gonna bet very heavily on games that are fun, which is why I've been really getting into projects that have basically the potential to be fun, right? Versus projects that are just, you know, look cool and have great impressive white papers. So what's my overall verdict on this? I will mint this, I will buy this, I will keep a close eye on this, but I remain cautiously optimistic. I'm not going to say this is the next metaverse. I think there's a lot of challenges ahead. I think it's worth supporting these guys on their journey, but also taking profits if they do have a big increase in price, and, you know, just keeping an eye on what they develop. And if they fully dox themselves, my level of confidence in this project will triple quite easily. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. There'll be links to go check that out. Like I said, I'm not on the pre-sale. I'm not anywhere, you know, like I'm gonna mint this publicly. I just wanted to share my thoughts on this video. Cheers, guys.